Hey CodeCrew, in this video you're going to learn 3 different animation techniques in SwiftUI. Now, we're going to take the Slots app that we built in this series and we're going to breathe some life into it with some subtle and simple animations. Even so, you'll see how the UI becomes so much more responsive, dynamic, and exciting, just using some of the simple techniques that you'll learn in this video. But before we dive in, I do want to thank Mark from Big Mountain Studio for sharing his knowledge. You see, he's been neck deep in SwiftUI for a while now and produced several SwiftUI books, including SwiftUI Views, Animations, and how to transition from a UI kit developer to a SwiftUI developer. So if you find that you like this video and you find that you like Mark's style of teaching, definitely check out his website over at bigmountainstudio.com. All right, without further ado, take it away, Mark.
Hello, CodeWithChris, CodeCrew. This is Mark Moeykens, and I'm happy to bring you this video on SwiftUI animations. Chris asked me to do this video for you guys because I have written a book on SwiftUI animations, and he thought this would be a good fit. And I'm excited to show you the 3 different ways that we can animate and expand this SwiftUI Slots application. But before we get into it, there's something I want to talk to you about as far as what is needed for animation. In order to implement animations in your app, there has to be some view that changes. And if you look at this page from my book, the concept is a view that has a starting state and an ending state. And what you're actually animating is that change between the start state and the stop state, or the start and the end state. So you might ask yourself, well, what can be animated in SwiftUI? Well, I kind of have this general rule that anything that has a numeric property can pretty much be animated. And I'm talking about things like size, position, rotation, and even color. Underneath, a color is just numbers. And so anything that has a number or a numeric value for a property can pretty much be animated, but that's just my general rule of thumb, just to keep it simple. So let's take a look at Chris's app and see what could possibly be animated. Okay, we're in Xcode, and I'm currently previewing Chris's app right here. And you notice that when I spin, there are mainly 3 things that change, 3 views that change. Remember, we need something that changes before we can animate it. And so one of them is pretty obvious, is that the images change on these tiles. Another change is the color. The color changes from this whitish color to this green color right here. And then the third change that we have is the credits. So as I spin, you notice the credits, they go up and they go down. So those are some changes that we can animate right there. Now, the simplest and quickest animation that you can implement is to simply put an animation modifier right on the parent view. So let me show you what I'm talking about here. If we look at this view right here, we notice that the root view is a Z stack. And if I collapse this, then what I can do is I can just add a modifier right on the Z stack called animation. And what kind of animation do I want? Well, to keep it simple, we can just say default. Now, your choices for animation mainly deal with the speed of the animation from the start to the finish. The default animation starts slow, speeds up, and then ends slow. This is also called easing in and easing out. So when we click the max spin button right now, you'll notice that green color is being changed here. So the green color is using this animation now. It fades in and fades out over 0.35 seconds. Now, if you want to customize this animation further, with that green color fading in and fading out, you can do that by changing the default parameter here that we have. So let's take a look. You notice I talked about easing, right? Easing in and easing out. Well, you can see the 3 different options right here: ease in, ease out, and ease in out. That basically means, start slow, end slow, or start slow and end slow with ease in and out. You can also give them a duration. So maybe we just want the animation to ease out. We want to slow down at the end. Well, we can use ease out if we wanted to. And I think the duration might be too slow for you to really notice a difference. So what we can do is we can actually increase the duration. So let's do that. Let's add that duration parameter. And if you notice, let's back up here a little bit. When I started typing in the different eases, you notice there was a duration here. So ease out duration. So we can just use that. And let's change this to 1 second. Again, the default is 0.35 seconds. So we're going to almost triple this. Okay, good. So let's test it now. And we want to look for the colors and notice how they take a second now to transition to green. See how it takes longer? And it takes longer for that color to go away. That's because the duration is now 1 second. Well, we're going to change that back. And let's just leave it at ease out. And we'll go with the default duration, which is about 0.35 seconds. Okay, for the next animation that I want to show you guys, it's actually called a transition animation. And I'm going to apply this to these images, these apples and these stars and cherries that show up. Now, right now, these images are just get replaced. So this is in a card view. Like if we expand the Z stack here, we take a look down here, we notice they're using a card view. And so a symbol, or the image is passed in, and the background color is also passed in. So let's take a look at this card view here. I'm going to hold down Command, and I'm going to jump to definition, go to the card view, and we see right here. So the symbol gets passed in, and it just finds the image in the asset catalog and displays it. Well, in order to do a transition, I'm going to need to change this code. And here's why. Let me show you something. Now, a transition has to have 3 parts. And that is, there has to be a way to add and remove what's being transitioned. So basically, think of transitions as a way to animate a view into the view hierarchy and animate it out of the view hierarchy. And that's using an if statement. So it's inserting and removing a view. It's not hiding and showing, it's inserting and removing. And you do that with an if statement like you see here. And then we're going to add a transition modifier to that view. So it's basically a way to tell it, how do you want to insert this view onto your screen? And how do you want to remove it from your screen? And then the last thing we need is an animation. And you notice here, like this example is using animation default, and we have something like that already, right? We added that animation modifier to the parent, and the parent applies that modifier to all of its children, including the card view that we're going to be changing. Okay, so I'm going to have to change this code. So instead of changing the image, I'm actually going to be inserting it and removing it. So we're going to need an if statement for that. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to evaluate the symbol that we get, and I'm going to put an if statement around this image right here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to hold down Command. I'm going to click on Image. And you see there's this make conditional here. So I'm going to click on that. So now we have this if statement. It added this VStack to it as well. So for the true part, I'll say if the symbol equals apple, that's one of our images, then show it right here. Else, and then another one is cherry. If symbol equals cherry, then we want to show another image. And then we'll have one final one because we only have 3 images. And I'm not going to put an if statement there because we know if it's not apple or cherry, it's going to be the star image. Okay, now I'm going to move some of these down here. First of all, let me indent here. Now the corner in the background, we don't need those specifically on the images themselves. We can move those to the parent view, which is now the VStack. So I'm going to hold down Command Option and use my right bracket key to move that down. And now it's on the VStack. And then we want to copy these images here. We'll put that in there, put that in there, fix the indenting, and we can leave the symbol. We don't necessarily have to use this text right here. Remember, the whole purpose of this is to wrap our images with if statements because we want to insert them into the screen and remove them from the screen by inserting another image on top of it. So let's just test it right now and make sure the app is still working. I'm going to click the back button and it's already running here. So let's just click it. And as you can see, it's still working. Nothing's really changed. Now remember, there's 3 parts for every transition. You have the if statement, something that controls the insertion and removal from the screen. You have the transition modifier, and then you have the animation modifier. Well, we have the if statement and we have the animation modifier. Now we just need the transition modifier. So what I'm going to do is on each image, I'm going to add a transition modifier like this. And as you can see, it takes a type of any transition. So I can type any transition, and then I can choose from there. So the example had slide in there. So let's see what that looks like. I'll use slide right here, and I'll apply that to my other images like that. Let's fix the indenting. And now what slide does is it slides in a view from the leading side and it exits the view from the trailing side. So it comes in from the left and it exits out the right. So let's run the app again and see how that looks. Okay, now you see the images. They're coming in from the left and they're exiting out the right with a new image that comes in from the left. So that looks pretty cool. Now from here, we can modify and customize it a little bit. So let's go back to the card here. And if you want to change it, instead of changing it in 3 places, we can change it in 1 place. And we could just create a variable to hold our any transition here. So let's do that. Let's create a variable here. And it's a constant, so I can just use let. And by default, I can just say it is any transition.slide, like that. And then I could just copy this variable and just replace it here. Now I want to make this change in 3 places. So one of the things that I can do is I can hold down Option and Shift and then click in the 3 different places that I want. And then from there, I can, delete the code all at once, and then I can paste it in all at once. So it's just an easy way to switch things around. Now, if you want to test that again, we can go back. Let's resume the app here. And as you can see, it's still working, right? Okay, good. So now when you want to test it, all you have to do is just change this variable up here. So instead of slide, maybe you want things to move in from the bottom and then exit out the bottom. So what we can use is called move. And move, it gives you an edge parameter. And basically you can define where do you want it to slide in from and slide out from. So we can say bottom if we want to. We can also say top. Or you also have the other options like trailing and leading. But we just want to go with bottom. So let's see how that looks. Okay, we'll go back. And it looks like it refreshed there. And now everything comes in from the bottom. Okay, so that is using transitions. Now, we talked about 3 different animation techniques. So the third one is using a spring. And the idea that I have is when this credit changes, when you win money, I want it to turn green. And I want it to bounce and get a little bit bigger. And then when you lose money, it goes back to what you see here, its default state. So we need to create that change. We need to add that green color and make it a little bit bigger when they win. Okay, so let's find the code where that win is processed. And we're going to go down here. Oh, I went by it. Okay, so it's right here, process win. Now this is where it checks and knows if you won or not by the matches that you have. So if we go down here, this is where you actually have a win if there's more than one match. So we need some kind of variable to get set to true. So let's create that variable. And let's see here. This is line 207. So we're going to come up here. I'm going to create another state variable. And I need it to be a state variable because when the screen changes or updates, I need that value to persist. And I'm just going to call it win. And I'm going to default it to false. Okay, so let's go back down here. I said line 207, right? Yeah. So here we go. So if they win, then we're going to set that variable to true. All right. And, they can win. And if they lose, we need to reset that variable. So what I'm going to do is just reset the variable right here. There we go. So it's always false unless they win. And it changes to true. Now we need to react or respond to this value change right here, when this win changes to true. So let's go back up to our view here, the credits, which is right here. And we want to change this background color. So I said there's 2 things I want. I want to change the background color to green, and I want to make it a little bit bigger. So let's take a look here. When win, I'm going to use what's called a ternary operator here. It's an if statement, inline if statement. So if win is true, then I'm going to change the color. Let me just copy this existing color here. Else, it's going to be white. And I'm going to change this to green. Like that. So if one is true, change it to green. Otherwise, make it white. And then the other thing I want to do is make it bigger. So let's add a scale effect right here. And again, I'm going to use a ternary operator. If when is true, I'm going to make it 1.2 times bigger than it already is. Otherwise, it's just going to be 1 times as big or its normal size. All right, let's resume that and let's test it. Make sure it's still working. Okay, we notice it's white and we're looking for a win. There we go. We got 1 win and notice it got bigger. And then if they lose, it gets smaller. Now, the animation it's using right now is this animation right here, the animation ease out. And it applies that animation modifier to all the children. Well, in SwiftUI, you can override the parent's property by putting on a different property on the child. So we're using animation ease out. And instead, what I want to do is use an animation spring on this child. So it's going to override that ease out animation with a spring animation. So I'll say animation and I'll say spring. Now I can just use a spring animation right here like this. And you'll notice as I run it, it's hard to see the default spring animation. It's hard to really see the spring. So I want to give it more springiness to it. Okay. So if you notice when I started typing in spring before, there are a lot of different options. And let's see, for autocomplete to work, sometimes I have to start all over here. Okay, there we go. We're going to use this one right here. Now you notice there are different spring animations here. There's interactive springs, interpolating springs. And if you want to know all the details between those different spring animations and to see examples, then you'll have to look in the book. I break all these down and then I test every single parameter, but we're not going to do this in the video. We don't really have that much time. So instead, I'm just going to use this override right here, this spring with the response and the damping fraction. The blend duration, we're not really going to get into that because from the tests that I've used and the conversations that I've had with other developers, no matter what you give it, it doesn't really make a difference. So let's use this one, and we're going to delete blend duration because that is an optional parameter. Okay, so for response, what is response? Well, let's take a look at something here. Apple defines the response parameter as the stiffness of the spring defined as an approximate duration in seconds. A value of 0 requests an infinitely stiff spring. So notice that Apple said it's an approximate duration. So think of it as that, approximate duration. Now, by default, animations are usually 0.35 seconds long. Well, we can increase the time of this spring animation by changing the response. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to double it and I'm going to make it 0.7. And damping fraction, what is damping fraction? Damping fraction. So the word damping, it means to reduce the maximum extent of something vibrating or bouncing back and forth, like a spring. So when you add a damping fraction, you're stopping the springiness of the animation. If you give it a 0, it's just going to bounce and bounce forever. But if you add some damping to it, like 50% damping, like the middle picture, it's only going to bounce half as much with the duration that you give it. And then if you apply a 1, which is 100% damping, then it's not going to bounce at all. And you just have a regular animation. Okay. So it's a fraction. So it's between 0 and 1, 0% to 100%. What I'd like to do is I like to start in the middle and just see how it looks. So I usually start with a 0.5. And then we can test it. There we go. And let's see how it looks. Keep your eye on this credits up here. Come on, we got to get a win. There we go. So notice it bounced a little bit, right? And it got bigger. So 0.5 doesn't look bad. We could stick with that. And then when it gets smaller, it bounces again. If you want to make it more springy, then you can just lower that amount. So if we go to like 0.3, let's see how that looks. It'll be more springy. There we go. So it bounces a little bit more. Now you notice when it bounces, look at the color. You notice the opacity gets more solid, more transparent, more solid as it bounces, right? And that's because it's adding a spring animation to the background color as well. Now that's something you might not want to do, right? But how do you prevent one modifier from being animated when there's an animation on the whole view? Well, it's pretty simple. All you have to do is just add another animation modifier here, and you can say .none. That way, everything above this modifier right here will not be animated, and anything below it will be animated. So the corner radius and the scale effect will be animated, but not the color change. So let's try that. There we go. So now that you notice the color isn't animating, it's not fading in and out. right, great. So that's it for this video. You learned 3 different techniques for animating. You learned that you can put an animation on the parent and it will animate all of the children and all of the changes that your children go through. You also learned how to apply a transition to a view that gets inserted and removed from your screen. And remember, views get inserted and removed from the screen by using an if statement. And then lastly, you learned how to apply a spring animation. You learned what the response parameter was, where it's an approximate duration. And you also learned about the damping fraction, which holds down a spring or presses down or dampens a spring. And then you also learned how to prevent other modifiers in the same view from being animated by applying an animation none to it. And anything above that will not be animated, but everything below it will be animated. All right, I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Back to Chris.
Thanks, Mark. Those were some pretty cool animation techniques, and I learned a few code editing tricks in Xcode as well, so thank you so much for that. Now, if you learned something new and you want to continue learning with Mark, then I highly urge you to visit his YouTube channel and his website over at bigmountainstudio.com. Now I want to turn it over to you. Are you an existing UI kit developer who is transitioning to SwiftUI? Or are you just starting your app journey right now? Either way, let me know by leaving a quick comment below, and on your way down there, don't forget to hit the thumbs up button and subscribe so you don't miss the next lesson. I really appreciate it. Now I want to thank Mark for presenting, and I want to thank you for watching and learning with us. Thank you so much. I hope you enjoyed it, and I'll see you next time.